Welcome to the Liberty Show. I'm Manuel Carlos with Ron Senkush. Good evening, Ron.
Hi, folks. How are you doing?
We've got a show today on socialism, and I was reading a book, Ron, and this is actually the second time I'm going through it. It's called None Dare Call It a Conspiracy, and it was written in 1971. And the title is going to turn some people off because that conspiracy word is sort of a taboo word now. You know, if you bring up anything right now and if you talk about, well, there might be something going on behind the scenes, people say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're not, we're not going to listen to you. So I'm going to put the book up on the screen right now. Don't judge the book by its cover. I think this is a book that we can highly recommend. In fact, I'm going to put it on libertyshow.info. You'll be able to click through the link, go to Amazon and order it. But what I want to talk about is chapter number 2, and I think it's very relevant now because we've got somebody openly running for president. Now, by the time this airs, we're going to know who the candidates are for the parties. But Bernie Sanders is openly running as a Democratic socialist, and people are not freaking out about that. Some people are, but for the majority of Americans, they're just like, well, he seems like a nice guy. And so the title of this chapter is Socialism, Road to Power for the Super Rich. And it's a philosophy which conspirators exploit, but in which only the naive believe.
I wanted to interject something really quickly before we go to the next slide about democratic socialism. It's my favorite thing to say is as if totalitarianism is somehow much more tolerable, palatable, or good when it's democratically voted on instead of forced in by solitary dictator.
Right.
You know, I mean, well, we all voted to be completely tyrannical and destroy all our liberties and freedom. Yeah. So it's much better than that normal socialism stuff, as we all voted for it. That makes it fantastic. Anyway. That's never could quite get that.
I don't get that either. All right, let's go to what is socialism, you may be asking. A system of society or group of living in which there is no private property. Means of production are owned and controlled by the state. In Marxist theory, transition between capitalism and communism.
So let me take a minute to go ahead and play devil's advocate here. So we're going to put that up on the screen so people can see it. And they're going to say, we're going to have our detractors saying, come on, Liberty Show guys, you're already way off track. The government doesn't own businesses, you know, in America. You're free to own your own business. And everybody has private property. You know, everybody has a home that they own, or most of us do. And, you know, so you guys are just nuts, right? Because there's no socialism here. They're going to say that. But hold on. But not so fast. So yes, the government doesn't own McDonald's or Subway or whatever business you may work at. But they're taxing it very heavily. They're taxing the business owner, the property that it sits on, and you and your paycheck. So through that form of taxation, one could clearly say that a portion of those things are being owned and controlled by the government. So are we 100% socialist according to the textbook definition? No, not yet. But we are definitely moving that direction and have been moving that direction a long time. And the higher the tax rates are, the more regulation they have, the more that statement is true for us. So although we don't fit truly the textbook definition, and our detractors would be right in pointing that out, I would make the argument that we are certainly working towards that goal. And if you ask someone who is a fan of this, what is the maximum limit that they should be able to take if you ask them the question, out of every dollar I make, what percentage of that dollar should be untouchable, should be mine, should never be taxed or taken by the government? They don't really want to answer that question, because the real answer is they'll take every bit of it if they get the chance, and that's their goal.
Right. And if they're controlling it, who really owns it anyway?
That's right.
You can't smoke in a Subway, can you?
No, you can't.
Okay. Check our special edition video out on the smoking. All right, now, if socialism is between capitalism and communism, then what is communism? And communism is a system in which goods are owned in common and available to all as needed. In reality, a totalitarian system of government in which a single authoritarian party controls the state-owned means of production. The state controls the individual. That means you. Ron?
Yeah. So here's the very nature of this. there are people who get together and say they think communism is awesome. They want to live under those rules. They think it's great. You know what? As a libertarian, I say, yeah, okay. That's fine. I think you and everybody who agrees to live under that should be free to buy property, and on that property do absolutely whatever you want with it and set the rules, as long as everyone who owns that property together or jointly is in that place agrees to these rules, and you're not holding them in against their will. You know, you're allowing people to leave if they choose to exit your perfect community. Then I think you should have the ability to live this way, if that's what you want. The reverse is absolutely not true. If the nation were communist, in communist China right now, if a group of people got together and said, hey, I realize we're in the minority here, and this isn't really very popular, but we'd like to have a capitalist society. I would like to have some private property ownership. I would like to have some rights that are guaranteed to me that don't require the state. So can we just buy a couple miles over here, and you guys just kind of leave us alone and let us be capitalists? No, they have things. They have the thing they put you in for that. It's called the gulag. Okay, you're going, or they're going to kill you, because that is absolutely, completely not tolerated in a communist society. So that is one of the things I think is inherently evil about it, in my humble opinion. I'm sure others would disagree. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your input. We'll put our mail information up, and we'd love to hear your arguments, and we'll address them on the show. But anyway, I just think it was important to show the contrast between the two.
And it's always such a great idea they have to force it upon us.
Yeah.
All right, so here's what the supporters believe. And, if you're for socialism, believe me, we're not trying to insult you or anything like that, because what they do is, like Bernie Sanders, he's great at identifying the problem. And then that's what gets people hooked in, but he's got the wrong solution.
Right.
But okay, here's what supporters believe. That socialism is a share the wealth program. And it's a movement of the downtrodden masses rising up against the exploiting bosses, the rich. Things such as college and health insurance should be free, and it's going to build a paradise on earth. Now here's the funny thing, for the past 50 years since the Great Society, we've moved closer and closer towards that socialism every year since the 1960s. And the gap between the rich and the poor has only grown, because when there's a concentration of power, which is what the socialists, they want that state controlling and making the laws. When there's that concentration of power, they're also controlling the wealth, and that wealth is concentrated there. And that's why it's not getting shared equally. Ron, any opinions on that?
Yeah, so what happens in these societies in reality, and in virtually, if not every single instance where they've ever been put into practice and tried, is that you still have the two main classes of society, the rich and the poor. It's just that the rich are the politically connected, and the poor is every single person that is not. And all of your freedom goes away. And not a fan of that.
Socialism, government control, all controls are people controls. You notice everything they come out with is always about controlling people. And the goal is to destroy private property, eliminate the family, and wipe out religion. Now I want you to think about all the social problems that we're having in the last 50 to 60 years. And it's about driving a wedge in the family and wiping out religion. Now, as libertarians, we support whether you're religious, whether you're not religious, whether the expression of that. But if you notice, their programs are always the people that have a certain religious faith, that they can't express that somewhere in public if they want to. And there's laws against that in court cases and everything. But what kind of gets me is the private property. The socialists, on one hand, they want the free college. Right? And what do they go? They don't want to go to college to get smart, let's be honest. They want to go so they can make more money, get a good job, and buy things. But yet, the socialism, they're against the private property, which always gets me too with these Bernie stickers on this car. They don't want you to have cars. But they'd be more than glad you could put a bumper sticker on the one you have while you have it. So, I mean, Ryan, do you have any comments there? Or?
I don't. It's pretty. That one's pretty self-evident.
Okay. All right. Okay. The idea that socialism is share the wealth program is strictly a confidence game to get the people to surrender their freedom to an all-powerful collectivist government. Republicans at the top are really no different than Democrats. If you notice, Republicans never repeal socialist programs, but claim they can run the programs more efficiently and reduce waste.
Exactly.
Ron?
Yeah, I mean, this is what you hear over and over, and I mean, it's really that second statement there that is one of the largest reasons why I'm no longer a Republican. I guess I never really was, other than saying I was a Republican voter. I've never worked inside the Republican Party or ran for office as a Republican or even, touted them, or even, I don't even think I've ever even donated to one of their candidates. Mm-hmm. But before I had my libertarian awakening, I generally voted for them over the Democrats, largely under believing their message of saying we want to shrink the government, we want liberty for people, and it was when I realized that they don't do anything of the sort that I left them and decided that I needed to look elsewhere.
Yeah. Now, have you noticed that there's some rich that support socialism?
Oh, sure.
And people like the Rockefellers, the Fords, the Kennedys, the Gates, Warren Buffett, and Clinton promote socialist programs that will increase taxes. And you'd be thinking about, wait a minute, why would they want to increase taxes? Because they have their wealth protected in trusts and tax-free foundations. They pay little taxes. Taxes are only for us peons.
That's right. Yeah, because when you can have political influence, when you're buying political influence, you can make sure that you're immune or that there are shelters or ways for your wealth to be protected. And then, the taxation effectively falls on largely the middle class, which is why the middle class is hit so hard. Mm-hmm. And while we're supporting everything, and this isn't I hate the rich thing. This is a look, this has happened because we have allowed our government to have too much power and to put these things into play. And so this is where the Bernie people and he gets them for the right reasons. When they say the rich are too powerful and they're buying political influence, he's absolutely right. Mm-hmm. But to me, his solution is flawed because he's saying, this hammer that we've given the government, is now hitting us on the head. My solution to that is give them a bigger hammer. Right? And all that's going to do is hurt my head harder when they smash me with it. Mm-hmm. So his solution is completely wrong. He's saying we need a bigger, stronger, more powerful government to prevent this horrible government from giving power to all these people. No, you're putting more power on the auction block for them to buy. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, personally, whether Sanders knows that he's wrong and doesn't care and is wanting exactly what he's asking for, or if he simply believes he's telling the truth and he thinks that that's the solution to the problem. I can't get in the head of Bernie Sanders. I don't know what he thinks.
Don't want to.
But I mean, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt for the purpose of the discussion. Right. Even if his intentions are all completely the best, he's wrong.
He's wrong.
He's wrong. Okay? And so it doesn't really matter what his intentions are, in my humble opinion, because your solution is not the right solution.
Right. Now, he's a democratic socialism. So democratic socialism is a method to control and consolidate wealth. And as a concentration of power makes dictatorship inevitable, which is the bigger hammer. And those who control the president will control the country. Now, don't think just because, and even if Bernie got in and he had the best intentions, that framework is set up now that the next one is probably going to get corrupt.
I always ask people who complain about the power that the rich hold, and I honestly ask them, and I've yet to hear a very good answer from them. And the question is a very simple one. What is it that you think a corporation or a business could do to you without government power? What is it that they could do that would be so horrible to you that if they didn't have corporate power behind them, right? If they didn't have government power behind them, what could they do? Could they knock in your door and ask you to buy their product? And perhaps, until you tell them to get off your doorstep. Could they manufacture a product and ask you to buy it? Advertise it on television, perhaps? Yes. What else? Not much. Not much that I can think of. If they got mad at you because you didn't buy their product, what could they do without government power?
Not much.
Nothing. Nothing at all, right? So I'm still waiting to hear the great answer to what these horrible, evil businesses and corporations could do to you without purchasing government power. And again, we'll put up our email here on the screen. So we want to hear your feedback. Let me know what you're afraid of. We'll address it on the show. We'd love to get your feedback.
Now here's a chart, Ron, that I copied from the book. And if you notice, it shows the difference between a constitutional republic and democratic socialism. And if you notice, in the constitutional republic, power is broke up, it's dispersed. In democratic socialism, it all goes to the executive. And it says a dictatorship was impossible in our republic because power was widely diffused. Today we approach democratic socialism. All power is being centralized at the apex of the executive branch of the federal government. This concentration of power makes dictatorship inevitable. Those who control the president indirectly gain virtual control of the whole country. Now, who would control the president? Probably their donors, right?
Oh, yeah.
Some of them.
Clearly.
And then some people behind the scenes that we don't know about.
Yeah, and if you pull that chart back up a second
Sure.
so I can see that again. So, yes, and you see how the power is distributed in the top, but at the bottom, it's all with the executive. And of course, we're moving that direction with the executive orders. Mm-hmm. It's not just the Democrats or Republicans. Both of them are guilty of this. And the other place it's most evident is the fact that we move every issue to the federal level.
You're right.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is the other important part that I think rational people in our audience who may even disagree with us on many things, we can find some common ground here. Why is it that every single issue seems to be escalated and pushed to the very top? And that is, it's very simple. Because power and corruption and absolute power fears competition. And it fears the free market. If people are free to choose other things, they won't make these horrible choices. This is why policy has to be forced down from the federal government everywhere so there isn't dissension. This goes directly against what our founding fathers had in mind with the separation of powers between the federal government and the states. The states were to be the laboratories of democracy where the people could vote on things and decide how they wanted to handle things separately. And so if the states were in check, not by the federal government, by each other, by competing with each other. If California said, we want to be socialist California, we want to raise the tax rate to 60% on everybody, we could just sneak out and move into Nevada, right? Where maybe Nevada had a better policy and said, you know, I kind of like 10% a little bit better. Maybe I'll just move out, and for those of you who like 60, knock your socks off. Enjoy. Love it. Hope it works good for you. Keep making the movies. I'll see you, all right? But I'm moving, right? And well, of course this is going to happen. Way more, I mean, than the reverse. Then somebody who's in Nevada making a bunch of money saying, man, I can move to California and give 60% of it away. Let me get on that, right? So it isn't going to happen. That's how they keep themselves in check, through the balance of power with the other states. But when you force all of your policy and all of your law up to the federal level and push it down across the whole nation, there's nowhere to escape. There is no check and balance. There is no let's try something different. And the bad ideas have to be shoved down from the top. They will never fly in a free market, in a place where people can move away from horrible legislation. The bad ideas will never make it, right? And that's why the push is to the federal government. And we've all fallen into this trap of, well, you know, the federal government's good, they would only have our best interests at heart. Well, no, they're killing the entire process.
Or taking it to the Supreme Court.
Exactly right.
So let's look at the next slide here. Can socialism work with the right people? Well, like Ron said earlier, power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So even if you got the right person in, would they be corrupted? Times change and technologies change. So people always think that we've evolved. You know, just because we've got a smartphone and we've got computers and we've got HD TV, technologies change principles never change. I mean, this is, you look throughout history, when somebody gets that kind of power, for the most part, they're going to get corrupted. Now, when we were at the Trump rally, and we were talking to some of the protesters, I met this union guy, and he came up to me, he goes, I know about you libertarians. He said, yeah, you're funded by the super bankers, and you got all this money because you don't want any laws, and you know what? And I'm like, well, I don't know who you're thinking about. You're not thinking about the Libertarian Party. We're not getting any money. You know, we're not granting anybody any favors. We're not getting elected. We're not, you know.
The ledgers are an open book. Yeah, come to a meeting. You don't have to join. You can see how much we have, what we spent it on, and where it comes from. Yeah, I mean,
he thought because we were for deregulation, that meant we were for the rich people. But you know, and I tried to tell him what you were saying earlier, that the regulations and everything is going to control the power, and it's actually going to be used against them. And he started doing this, and he says, well, that's why we just need to get the right people. We get our people, and it's going to run right. And then he literally just ran away. Yeah. And so anyway, but that's a lot of them what they believe. They believe if they just get their people in, then it's all going to work out right.
Yeah.
So, you know, the effects, all these programs, they need to be paid for. The socialist programs need to be paid for. We can't collect enough in taxes, so we have to borrow the money. The money devalues. Invisible tax is on everyone. And the rich make interest off deficit spending and debt. And Ron, do you want to say something?
I do. You know, we've done an entire Liberty show on this, and we should post a link to where we've talked about money and how it's devalued and how that is a tax on the people. We could do 2 or 3 more shows on it. You know, it's that big of a topic, and it's that sweeping. So please check out some of our other stuff about that.
Well, I'm glad you asked, so, because I've embedded the video.
Oh, did you?
Here, and I took a short segment that actually explains this. This is out of the Hidden Secrets of Money, Part 4.
Our current system is not only unconstitutional, but it robs us of the liberty and prosperity our forefathers fought and died for. We are all feeling the effects of ignoring the Constitution right now. By forcing more currency into circulation, our purchasing power is diluted. Inflation is a slow and insidious stealth tax that is simply the result of this debt-based monetary system. This system empowers and benefits those who create the currency and receive it first, as they get to spend it into circulation before it has an effect on the economy. They're stealing purchasing power from you and transferring it to the banks and the government every hour of every day because of this false monetary system. And it's not like the people at the top don't know this. To quote the Federal Reserve, the decrease in purchasing power incurred by the holders of money due to inflation imparts gains to the issuers of money. This is a fraud. It is a pyramid scheme, it is a Ponzi scheme, it's a scam, and it's a lie. Our entire monetary system is nothing but a form of legalized theft. But here's the biggest con job of them all. The Federal Reserve is not federal, it has stockholders. There is no federal agency that has stockholders. What's a stockholder? A share of stock represents a percentage of ownership in a corporation. So the stockholders are the owners of that corporation. Therefore, the Federal Reserve is a private corporation with owners. And you can see it for yourself if you go to the Federal Reserve's website, and it will say, the stockholders receive an annual dividend of 6%. Now we know that the stock in the Federal Reserve was originally issued to the largest banks in the United States. But because of mergers and acquisitions through the years, you can't actually trace who owns the stock in the Federal Reserve. That's a very closely guarded secret. My guess would be that the owners are those primary dealers, the banks that get to make a profit by selling part of our national debt, those bonds, to the Federal Reserve, who buys them with a check from nothing. Then we pay tax to pay the principal and the interest on those bonds so that the Federal Reserve can pay the banks a 6% dividend. Don't be alarmed if you don't quite comprehend the deception of this system at first glance. Very few people do. It is purposely complex. The economist John Maynard Keynes once wrote, "By this means, government may secretly and unobserved confiscate the wealth of the people, and not one man in a million will detect the theft." I believe that presented correctly, anyone can understand this system, regardless of how complex it is. So let's do a recap and break it down even more. The way the system works is that, step 1, the government creates glorified IOUs. These bonds increase our national debt and put the public on the hook to pay it back. Step 2, IOUs are swapped to create currency. The Treasury sells the bonds to the banks. The banks then turn around and sell our national debt at a profit to the Federal Reserve, which they probably own. The Federal Reserve then opens its checkbook that doesn't have a penny in it and buys those IOUs with IOUs that it writes, checks, on a checking account that has a zero balance. Then they give those checks to the banks and currency just springs into existence, and then the whole process repeats. This results in a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury, which is really just a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the numbers in the various branches of the government, and we get to step 3. The government spends the numbers on promises, public works, social programs, and war. Then the government employees, contractors, and soldiers deposit their pay into the banks, and we get to step 4, where the banks multiply the numbers by magically inventing more IOUs through fractional reserve lending, where they steal a portion of everyone's deposit and lend it out. That currency gets redeposited, and then a portion is stolen again, and the process repeats over and over, magnifying the currency supply exponentially. Then we work for some of those numbers, which brings us to step 5, where our numbers are taxed. We pay tax to the IRS, who then turns our numbers over to the Treasury, so the Treasury can pay the principal plus the interest on bonds that were purchased by the Federal Reserve with a check from nothing. Then we get to step 6, the debt ceiling delusion. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt and will eventually collapse under its own weight because politicians always kick the can down the road. They don't want it to collapse on their watch. And finally, step 7, the secret owners take their cut. The world's largest banks own the Federal Reserve. Those banks make a profit selling our national debt to the Fed. They make a profit when the Fed pays them interest on the reserves held at the Fed, and the Fed pays them a 6% dividend on their ownership of the Fed. This system is fundamentally evil. It funnels wealth from the working population to the government and the banking sector. It is the cause of the artificial booms and busts of modern economies, and it causes great disparity of wealth between the rich and the working class. And it is only possible because we no longer use real money, we use currency. But worst of all, it is a form of enslavement. Bond is the root word of bondage. Whenever a government issues a bond, it is a promise to make us pay tax in the future. Nobody asked you if you wanted to pay tax today for the prosperity we all enjoyed in the last century. Nobody is asking our children if they want to work hard in the future to pay for the prosperity we're enjoying now. George Washington once wrote to James Madison, "No generation has the right to contract debts greater than can be paid off during the course of its own existence." By stealing prosperity from tomorrow so we can spend it today, we enslave ourselves and future generations. Now this all sounds pretty bad, but there is great hope, for you are the greatest threat to this false monetary system. This system relies on the public being ignorant of its workings. Please share this knowledge with everyone you know, because an informed public that fully understands the system can build a better future for generations to come. And now I leave you with this is the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. It's located on Constitution Street, and that is just as much of a joke as the New York Fed being located on Liberty Street. Both of them are unconstitutional, both of them limit our liberty, and they transfer wealth away from us every second of every day to the Federal Reserve, to the government, and to the banking sector. You are now among the 1 in a million who can detect the theft of your prosperity. So the big question is, what can you do about it?
How all these programs that you want to do is the taxes are actually getting paid to the rich, who you say you're against. So the only hope for this kind of stuff to get passed was that a central bank was to disguise it and have it put through by Democrats as power. So when the Federal Reserve went through, And what you just saw in the video about how the Federal Reserve is owned by private bankers. And you notice Bernie, he's always going to go after the bankers, right? He's going after the big bankers. He doesn't mention the biggest bank.
Mention the Federal Reserve.
The biggest bank that's owned by all these people. So all our labor and tax and everything goes to pay. They get first use of the money. They get paid for this. The whole central banking system was created by the very group it was supposed to strip of power. So the Democrats are the ones that brought it in. It was supposed to break up the big banks. Look how that's worked out the last 100 years. We have taxes now that were supposed to be just on the rich, now are on everybody. Our dollar's lost 97% of its income. And this was all passed by, this was supposed to help us concentrating this power. It was hijacked, it was put into effect by the people that you thought it was going to punish. And this is how this is being used against you. So when people like Bernie Sanders claim they're going to punish the big banks of Wall Street, they're only giving more power to them. That's the deception.
I just want to point out here that, we've sort of been conditioned through society or through our lives to see this increase in prices as just the way it is. Mm-hmm. That's just the way it is. Yeah, this thing was 20 cents in 1970, now it's $2. That's just the way it is. You just have to accept that. That's just how it is, right? The prices just increased, right? Yeah. Right. They just do. Why? Mm-hmm. You have to ask yourself, why? Why is that the case? Why does this cost so much more now? Is it about scarcity? Is there less of this that has increased the price? I go to the store, these are all over the place, right? They don't seem to be very scarce to me, right? I think the resources to make these seem to be pretty abundant. I haven't heard anything in the news about paper shortages or things really with anything. Everything is in more abundant now, if anything, than it was 20, 50, 80 years ago, because the means of production has increased and technology has allowed more efficiency in those areas. So, why does the cost go up, right? So there is a reason for this, folks, and it's not just because that's the way it is, right, or it's supposed to, right? It's by design, and if you wonder why, these are the reasons why. You have to find out.
So our final slide here. Conclusion, socialism and communism is not a movement of the downtrodden masses, but is a movement created and manipulated by billionaires to gain control over everything. Socialist, you are being used. And you know what? You should be ticked off. Because you've always heard the argument that it doesn't work, and of course the comeback is, well, if we get the right person in, or we'll make it work this time. It's never going to work because it's designed by the people that you think they're punishing, that you're punishing. They're controlling it. They get richer. Every time you push one of these programs, they get wealthier, we get poor. It's the exact opposite. It's counterintuitive, and it's because it's been hijacked.
I would just close and add one simple thing to this. There is going to be no utopia on this earth. Mm-hmm. This is not a religious statement. Mm-hmm. This is an observation reality check statement. You could go down the path biblically about why there won't be a utopia on earth, which is fantastic, and we can talk about that if you want. I'm setting that aside for a minute and say, even without that, I can build you a giant case from the secular side based on history and everything that we've learned and seen so far in our human history that will show you that we're never going to have a utopia. The simplest reason is because we can't agree on what that is. We're individuals, human beings. We have different needs, wants, desires, and priorities. Because of that, we simply cannot agree on what a utopia will look like. So what can you do if you can't create utopia? What should you do? What is the moral? What is the best thing you could deliver? What kind of system could you deliver if you can't deliver utopia? I'm going to make the argument that is a system that allows you the maximum amount of freedom to live your life as you see fit, as long as you're not harming other people, taking their stuff, committing fraud. And that would be the type of government that libertarianism would bring.
And with that, we'll see you next time on The Liberty Show. I'm Manuel Carlos with Ron Senkush.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.